Hello there, everybody. So, when you think about autonomous vehicles becoming more common on the road, I just passed one the other day on I 45 southbound, coming up from Dallas towards Houston. And it was a day cab, nobody in the truck. you know, uh, I don't know what politicians are thinking. Trucking is a pretty large voting population. Um, you know, I I think trucking covers both parties, Democrat and Republican. Sometimes you'll see good things come from the Democrats. For example, expanded truck parking. Indiana is a great example. So I often advise owner operators try to stay independent. I know that's hard to do when you have things like California AB5 and the PRO Act, which the Democrats support, which put a target on independent contractors. But there are some things that Democrats do that's you know things that we like truck parking. Currently, there's no states out there that ban autonomous vehicles. There's no legislation in the House or Senate regarding self-driving trucks. That could change in the years to come. Um, it, right now there's prototypes of that are doing it, but we are self-governing, meaning that regardless of what the corporations want to do, if they want to eliminate the truck driver through automation, well, the voters have something to say about this. Uh, the public, it's uncertain whether the public would welcome, trucks that drive themselves or would prefer someone in the truck. Because obviously there's bad truck drivers, and you could argue that automation is safer for the public. The data is going to have to support that. And the way AI is going, and they talk about super AI, it's conceivable that AI could be a safer driver. Um, but there is politics involved in this, and truckers, they could have a say in whether or not these jobs are going to go away because truckers can vote. We're self-governing, so no matter what the technology is, AI, super AI, ultra AI, you know, if the voters shoot it down, then the corporations will have to go to the back to the drawing board. Just because the technology is available doesn't mean you should do it. Um, there's lots of instances where technology is available, but people are more comfortable with a human being at the helm. Take like airline pilots for example. Yeah, you could be an autopilot once you reach um, altitude, but for landings and takeoffs, from my understanding, people who fly prefer a qualified pilot. They don't want their lives to depend on a machine. So we are self-governing. If truckers were to contact their representatives, state level and federal level, they could at least voice their opinion or make campaign contributions for those candidates that support truckers or support organizations like OOIDA, which is, there to represent the interests of the truckers. But, we don't have to take this lying down where we just have to assume that someday there's going to be, no truck drivers. It's just going to be fully automated. That's the direction it's heading, but that doesn't mean where we're going to end up at. So as unlikely as it seems, you can imagine if autonomous vehicles became more and more common, um, the public support for truck drivers may grow. Especially if there's a catastrophe, some fatalities or something, and there's driverless trucks involved. The public could sour on that very, very quickly, and then that would show up in the voting box. And whichever party, grabs the issue is going to grab support. And you may be the most diehard Republican out there, but if the Democrat Party supports having drivers into trucks, you're going to have to change your stripes, because this is your livelihood that's going to be at stake. Or vice versa. Let's say you're a diehard Democrat, but it's the Republicans who are fighting for your job. And you're like, never thought you would vote for the other party or switch parties. But, the parties aren't rigid, they're not fixed in stone, they do change. When I was growing up, Democrat Party was the blue collar party. I mean, anybody who was working class, or wanted to be middle class, was would vote Democrat. Because the Democrats represented the working man, and it represented the poor. So it was the Republicans who represented the ultra wealthy. We're going back to the 70s and 80s. And then somewhere along the line, this switched. And then it's like now the wealthy support the Democrats, and the Republican Party supports the blue collar worker. So they made the switch, and a lot of times people vote based on party. They just like, well, their parents were Democrats or Republicans, and they always vote no matter what the same way. Family history of voting a certain type of way. Well, then the parties switch, and then they're no longer fit within the party that traditionally that they had voted for. It's right now. Things are good for one party, but things could change. An unpopular war, you know, um, automation, AI, whoever can grab the issues by the horn is going to, gather votes. I think, right now the Democrats are kind of lost in space, but, if they would focus on the working man's issues and stop vilifying men, which is their favorite thing to do, right? Uh, but if they would just focus on the basics, I think the Republicans will make a mistake sooner or later, and then Democrats will come back in popularity. But if the worst case scenario for the truck drivers would be is if both parties agree that autonomous vehicles is the way to go. That would be just horrendous. That'd be awful. But you see robo taxis and uh, other types of vehicles are going full automation. It it may be unstoppable technology. It's like the technology's there. We don't need people to drive cars. But I tell you, the American people love to drive their cars. They love their cars. And they vote. So they start making all these vehicles autonomous. Well, the public opinion does have an opportunity to weigh in every election cycle. We are a self-governing country, and if we don't want it, we don't have to have it. No matter what the corporations say. So if we don't want autonomous trucks, if the voters agree, then we won't have autonomous trucks. But this is a role of self-governance. Right now, the corporations are licking their chops, thinking that this is going to be implemented without any resistance. I think they're going to find a lot of resistance, especially when these truckers start losing their jobs to machines. I think the Teamsters are well positioned to make a comeback and be a much stronger union. Typically, the unions favor the Democrat Party, but here recently we see the auto workers, steel workers supporting the Republican Party. But it's whichever party represents the working class and the worker is going to do well. So we see automation in the ports. The unions are really strong in the ports, and they fought back against automation, and they were successful, and they had political support too. So if automation comes for truckers' jobs, I would expect a political upswell of support for those candidates, Democrat or Republican, that are going to support truckers. And as much as we may not like, one party or the other, they both have warts. Neither one of them are all that attractive, but you know, it's like you're going to have to vote for the candidate that's going to protect your job, or you're going to be unemployed. That's really going to be hard hitting, very hard hitting. Um, I would think right now politicians should be thinking about protecting the American trucker, but so far they seem to be supporting corporations who want to go full autonomous vehicles. I really don't see the need to go to autonomous vehicles other than it's going to increase profits for the corporations because they won't have to pay wages. But I don't think they're going to lower the price of their products. They're just going to pocket that profit. They're not going to all of a sudden lower the price by 50% because it's an autonomous vehicle. They won't do that. They will have record profits. So I don't see a lot of political support for autonomous vehicles, especially if there's fatalities start racking up. Um, if they can prove to the public it's safer, you know, they might make a persuasive argument. But just like pilots and airplanes, people prefer to fly with a pilot. They don't want to go full autonomous in an airplane. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.